good evening. It's still early. All of you guys should get an A in my classes
Because we showed up.
because you guys show up before the class began. Oh, you are a better student than I was.
I know one time someone came really late for mass, and Father said, "Are you late for today or early for tomorrow?"
I made a total of 40 copies. I hope I make enough copy for everyone. You know, to prepare for this class, I have to go back to my professors. I actually sent email to my professors, asking my professor that can I use their resources, and they say yes, you have my permission. I say thank you. If they don't, then I have to start digging my own resources. I think we're still a little bit early, so I see a lot of familiar faces. And those who are watching me online on YouTube at home, my name is Father Chung. I've been here for 3 years. I graduated from CTU, Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, which is the combination of 6 theological schools in Chicago, which is including this including University of Chicago Theological School as well. And part of learning from 6 different schools in Chicago is kind of neat because you get 6 different perspectives theologically from the church. You get a view from from our brothers and sisters Protestant, from the which is pluralism view of how the church operates, including the history of the church and interpretation of the church. So it's quite unique, but at the same time, it's a nice way to ground the student to how they should form their own study or how they should form their own theology. So that's just a simple introduction. And how about we begin with a prayer? Today, the first lesson we're having today is on St. Stephen. So let us begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Gracious Father, who gave the first martyr, St. Stephen, the grace to pray for those who took up the stone against him, grant that in all our sufferings for the truth, we may learn to love even our enemies, to seek forgiveness for those who desire our hurt, looking up to heaven to him who was crucified for us, Jesus Christ, our mediator, advocate, who is alive and reign with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. So good evening. All right. I know most of you guys. I think we first met. Would you mind, if I might ask your name? Yes.
Your name.
Well, welcome. Welcome to St. Alphonsus. So our first session today, the topic is St. Stephen, the first martyr of the church within the first 100 years of, actually not even first 100 years, the first year of the church. We get one martyr. Geez, that's pretty fast. In my opinion, it's quite fast. It's fascinating in such a way that somehow come along the way, the Christian faith is already beginning to take root in the life of the people, especially in the follower of Christ. But for Stephen, in the case for Stephen, will be the follower of the apostle. It's very interesting. Remember that he is a follower of the apostle. So which just give us a sense of what are we dealing with? What are we dealing with when the passion of Jesus and the resurrection of the body and the 3 years public ministry of Jesus here give us a sense the mission of the church. So when we're looking at what is it, and we can begin to take a look at the mission of the church based on the mission of Jesus in his public ministry, which is he proclaiming the reign of God through his public ministry. He began with repent, heal the sick, eat with tax collector, dine with sinners, be with the widow, be with the orphan, take care of the poor, and everything else, those who are cast aside by society. And after that, the apostle continued that mission, beginning within their own community, eventually spread out. But so far, many of us, we're familiar with what they call the Greco-Roman. Basically, we're thinking that, okay, at the time of Jesus, there's only one empire. But in reality, at the time of Jesus, from the worldwide perspective, there are actually 4 empires. If you look at your note, that I kind of give you a layout on that one, it gives you, the first one is the Roman Empire, right? Let me see if I get it correctly here. The Roman Empire, just to help us what they are dealing with, or see how is their influence, by taking a look at your color map. If you look at back of your handout, there should be a color map, something like this. So to give us a visualize pictures, what is Roman Empire cover, they're actually like a circle. Well, not a circle, but actually it's surrounding the Mediterranean area in that color. So that is the Roman Empire, the cultural and what we call the Latin culture, that including the Greek. And if we remember something from our own education, we have the saying that all roads lead back to Rome. So the Roman Empire, they built the network system in such a way that the soldier get back to Rome to defend Rome as fast as possible, whether by the sea route, the Mediterranean, or by land, will get them back to Rome quite fast. And because of that extensive network, allowed them to able to expand their trades and their influence in the area. Many of us, we probably don't realize that the number one enemy of Rome is the Persian Empire, which is to the east. And if we go back to the Jewish, from the Old Testament, we come to realize that the Persian Empire, they will be up and down to conquer, the Israelite many different times. And even more so, they even exiled them, as we remember the Babylon, exiled them to Babylon. So we can look at that from that angle. We can see that the Israelite, or the region, now beginning to shape by two major empire. Yes, the Roman Empire. At the same time, there is an influence from the Persian Empire as well. And probably something that you're not realizing this, and in your layout, in your handout, I mentioned about the civilization of India. Civilization of India is what's unified by Ashoka king. Eventually, he unified the country, and of course he became the title, the name of Buddhist. And that civilization, also there's a lot of trading taking place at the same time. And there's another empire taking place, which is China. At the time of Jesus, is controlled and dominated by the Han Dynasty. And of course, there's an influx of people were traveling through the region because of the trade, the soldier, the war taking place, prisoners, merchants. So all those taking place have to go through the region. And when they go to the region, what is the fastest route to get to Rome? By the water. They just get on a boat, cross across the Mediterranean, they arrive in the center of Rome. Because of that, we can see that there's so many different people, different culture taking place, moving in and out the region. It also means that they are impacted by those cultural, by those influence, by different people, how people interact and how people relate to each other. And because of that, it also means that what do they take with them? Religion. They also take religion with them. For example, the soldier, they also bring their own faith and belief whenever they enter the war. For example, the Roman soldier, they will carry with them a little statue that they will do devotion to that little god that they have. So that God that they carry with them will protect them when they were into the war and fighting. Beside all the four empires taking place that have some sort of movement, interrelation in the region, we're also recognizing that there's a tribal region taking places here. The north, we're dealing with, let me see, what do I have in here? So we call that nomadic, nomadic, where we look at the Turkish and the Mongol up north. And of course, we know that the Egyptian over here, down here, and south of Egyptian, we're looking at the Ethiopian, and which is also the Sudan at the current time. So far so good by geographics, so that allow us to understanding during the time of Jesus, we're not just dealing with the Roman, but they're also the huge influence by different culture, different place, different region, and different things impact the region of the people at the time. Now we're shifting our focus to more local. We're shifting our focus to Jesus. We're shifting our focus to Jesus, a local context. We know that the Jewish people, they are under the authority of the Roman. They have to answer to the Roman. But before they can answer to the Roman, usually what the Roman do is that they send there's a representative who is a governor controlling the region, and under the governor, they're also the leader. So at the time of Jesus, there is a Herod. Herod is responding to the governor, but even though yes, he's a leader, he's the king of the Jews, and yet he still have to answer to the governor, because the entire region is controlled under the Roman law. And under Roman law, who representing the Caesar is the governor. So when we look at from that, now we're looking at the people. When we look at the people here, the Jewish people, at the time, we call Judaism, which is the term that we're familiar with. One of the reasons why we call it Judaism is that we can looking at from three different schools at the time. The school of Pharisee, the school of Sadducee, and the school of Essene. And we probably heard all of them, from the gospel, from the writing of the apostle, from the letter. I think the term that we probably hear the most is probably Pharisees and the Sadducees. We hardly ever hear Essene. Whether you like it or not, these three groups, they already exist way before Jesus was born. They've been around for a while. They stick to their theological understanding and how practice and how also they form their life around it. One of the famous person that we're familiar with is Paul. St. Paul, who is well educated under the school of Pharisees. At the same time, he also been recognized by the school of Sadducee as well. Not the Essene. The Essene is more ascetic. They're more into hermit, waiting. So the best person to representing the school of Essene would be John the Baptist. He will be the one who representing that school. So now we're looking at geographics, what influenced the people, who are the empire at the time, influenced the society, influenced the people, and the impact taking place. We're looking at Jesus at the local context taking place. And now that we're going to move, and also what the impact of people, the school, the religious impact of people at the time. So now we're looking at Jesus' movement after the Pentecost. Why is it a Pentecost? After the passion, the resurrection of Jesus, isn't that enough for the apostle to go out and to preach the gospel? And yet, as we over and over, years after years, we hear from the Acts of Apostle how fearful they are to the Jews. So by saying that how fearful they are to the Jews, it doesn't mean that they are fear to all the Jews. They fear specifically to particular school at the time of the Jews. In this case, they are afraid of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. We see that happening with Jesus, and we see that in the first year, in the first year of the apostle, even Paul himself asking permission from the leader in the school of Sadducee to go out, to go beyond their own boundary, to persecute Christians at the time. So it's not something new, it's something already taking place, but no one died yet except for Jesus, who actually the first one. Well, one way to look at it from this particular angle, if Jesus started a movement, he has a follower, and the follower eventually get bigger and bigger and bigger, which is a very common practice at the time when there is a particular religious leader beginning to go out and preach. Usually he has a follower. Even for John the Baptist, when he went out and preached, he has disciples. If we remember one of the incidents, John the Baptist sent his own disciple to Jesus and asking the question, "Are you the one?" And Jesus responding to this John the Baptist's disciple was, come and see. Come and see. So it's a very common practice that religious leader at the time do have follower. The only problem here with Jesus here is his is getting bigger, more influence. So in a way, from a religious standpoint, that there's a competition taking place from the school of Sadducees, the school of Pharisees, and the Essenes. They're looking at Jesus' movement as a competition. It's a competition taking place here that Jesus have a big influence. Jesus have a big influence on the people. And why is that? Why is it that Jesus' influence was captivate the people at the time, and actually telling people that they look at Jesus and they follow him? And I think that's go back to earlier when we talked about in the beginning. I mentioned that Jesus' mission, the reign of God, because by now, as we recall this different story in the Bible, Jesus apparently the only religious leader at the time willing to sit down to eat with tax collectors. Yes, Patrick. We don't know that. It wasn't mentioned, but we know that they are Jews. So when we're looking at from that angle, that Jesus is a leader of this particular movement, who preaching about the reign of God, who carry the mission to care for those who are abandoned. He willing to eat with tax collectors. He preaching repent, conversion. It's unheard of at the time, because he breaking down the social class in his time. Who would eat with tax collectors? The most hated person. Who would eat with sinners? According to law of Mishnah, you do not eat with sinners. You outcast them. And Jesus was done with them. He captured them by his preaching. Not just preaching alone, but also his action allowed them to see that he walked and talked at the same time. Make him stand out from that particular angle, making him stand out compared to the rest of religious leader at the time. And because of that, he got this whole movement with him that preaching the reign of God. So you get the Jesus movement, and he'll been crucified, and die, and now you get this movement suddenly pick up after the Pentecost. Now they filled with Holy Spirit. They're not afraid anymore. They began to talk and preaching in different languages. And they go out and preaching the good news, the reign of God. And they do. They do that. In order for us to understanding this, we can see a lot of this information from the writing of St. Luke, from the Gospel of Luke, and also from the Acts of the Apostle. Generally, when we're looking at from the writing of St. Luke here, he is a reliable resources as a historian. All right? Remember what I say, reliable resources as a historian. So what that means is that when we're looking at from the historical perspective, it requires us to have a critical thinking, critical lens into what is he presenting, what he's writing, and what is he give us perspective of what's happening. So what that means is that for Luke, we can, from the writing of Acts of Apostle, we can see that there is something happening the first years. I'm saying the first year. Within the first year, of Jesus' death, passion, and resurrection. There is something significant happening to the people, especially to the early church community, especially happened to the apostle, and so what it means for them to continue the mission of Jesus, to go out, to baptize all the nation, and willing to die for it. All right, so far so good? Any question? No question. Wow, I'm lucky today then. In the meantime, if there is a question coming up, feel free, just raise your hand and we will address, the concern. The topic today is about St. Stephen, which has happened the first year of within the first year after the Jesus passion and resurrection and the Pentecost. St. Luke, he gave us a very overview perspective of early church community, what it should be like, and allow us to see how they also operate and how do they preach. It also allow us to see how they share their welfare among themselves in the community. To give us what happened here, why they have to pick 7 deacons to help them out with this. Continue with Jesus' movement. They go out just like Jesus did. They went out, carried Jesus' mission. Now Jesus' mission is being carried by the apostle. And they are going out to preach the good news. To preach the good news in such a way that they beginning to capture the heart of the people. And now the movement keep getting bigger and bigger. They're beginning to learn and begin to understanding to live in a community, to operate in a community. Remember I said earlier that the region influenced by different group of people? Many of us don't realize that at the time of Jesus, you're looking at overarching the entire Roman Empire. The entire Roman Empire, the Jews is only about 7 to 10% population in the entire Roman Empire. That's little, isn't it? That's little. And yet, it's created a big impact. Now, the region is influenced by so many different cultural diversity in the region, due to the trade route, due to the soldiers that in and out the region, due to people that crossing north, south, east, west for trade, merchants, merchant by their trades. So you can imagine that they have a extremely complicated, a complex network taking place here. So that means that if you remember that after the Pentecost, the apostle went out, they began to preach in different languages. It's precisely that, because of the level of diversity in the region. And when he does that, the people ask the question, wait a minute, how did they able to speak out our language in our own tongue? For them, it's a miracle. However, also pointing out something that we might miss is that 2 things might happening here. That's mean that those people, they recognize who they are. They recognize the apostle. And when they recognize the apostle, they say, how can they speak our language? Second, it also means that the apostle preaching to all the nation, to the Gentile. So they convert them, and eventually they fall into entire big Jesus movement within the first year. So within the first year, we're not just only dealing with Jew Christian, but also you deal with the Gentile Christian. who are not Jews. And now they are going to come to live together, celebrate as in the church, house churches, in a community, and living in a community. All right, you're familiar with this. When you begin to live in a community, guess what happened? There's always a problem, isn't it? Differences arises. Happened to us in the 21st century. It happened to the apostle in the first century. They have a big problem. They have these big groups, different cultural diversity of different people coming in to live together, and now they share resources. Share resource is also mean that there need to be an equal distribution. So if there's an equal distribution, and we are human, we fall short in this over and over and over. We're beginning to have certain prejudice with us. Well, happened to the early church community too. Those who are Jewish and Christian deserve a better portion compared to those who are Gentile Christian. It's a big problem. Eventually, the complaint make it to the apostle. So the apostle said, well, we need to address the problem. So what should we do? So one way to look at it is that, well, we need somebody who's have to be stand in the middle. It doesn't take sizes. And so that the distribution can be equally divided. They come up with something that quite intelligent. Let's call 7 men to form them to become a deacon. And just so happened that one of them named Stephen. So far, so good? So now you know how the movement, community, all this impact by different group of people. Now you live in your community, and now we got the formulation of this 7 deacon who representing the apostle, the leader in the community, to making sure that all the distribution are equally distributed. So now we have this 7 deacon. We don't know, I don't recall the other 5 names, but at least I can recall 2 names. Stephen is one of them. The second one is Nicholas. As we know, these 2 names, they are Greek names. They're Greek names, Stephen and Nicholas, they're Greek name. It also means that they're the follower of the apostle, and they're Gentiles. You know, a lot of scholars still argue about this, whether Stephen is Jews or Greek or Gentile. You know, the argument is still there. However, there is no concrete evidence to show or to demonstrate that Stephen is Jews. There's no clear evidence. However, there's a what they call a bridge argument. A bridge argument here states that Nicholas, who is a Greek, who had not been converted to Christian yet. So Nicholas himself, he has to went to the ritual of conversion. So in order for him to become a deacon, he have to went to that ritual of conversion, which is mean the baptism. And after that, it's been recorded that Nicholas went through that, but there is no indication for Stephen, because they have to go to the baptism before they can be ordained a deacon. So the bridge here is saying that possibly he's Jews. It also means that, yes. Usually they've been submitted. They submitted by the leader who are faith, strong in faith and holy, and they're selected from the community. So That is the bridge argument for Stephen saying that he is potentially Jews. However, another school of scholars saying that we don't know that. Just because it wasn't mentioned that he received the baptism before the diaconate doesn't mean that he's a Jew. It also mean that he may have been converted before that, and it's never been mentioned. But there is one thing concrete, that is Stephen, the name itself, is Greek name, not a Jewish name. From the Acts of Apostles, chapter 7, actually contained the longest preaching of all, is by St. Stephen. He would stand in the middle of Sanhedrin. He preaching for so long with passion and everything else. Remember that they selecting these 7 deacons to help them in the community for the distribution of goodness so that everybody receiving their fair share. For Stephen, he said, well, I'm going to become a preacher. So he get in the middle of the Sanhedrin here. And he preached for a long time about Jesus and the salvation taking place in the person of Jesus. And defending the faith, the Christian faith. And talk about the truth and the gospel that continue the mission of Jesus taking place here on earth. And one way to look at it is say, he preaching the reign of God. Remember I said about the 3 schools. You get the Jesus movement, and we get these 3 schools. Out of 3, we can say 2 of them. Because the Essene, they're more out in the desert. They're away from the city. So now you get these 2 schools, the school of Pharisee and the school of Sadducee. And of course you get the Jewish leader who are in the synagogue. They don't like that. No, they hate it. So what do they do? They try to silence him. So they don't like what Stephen was preaching about. So guess what they do? They went up, they dragged him out. They dragged him out of the temple, and they stoned him. If you realize that stoning somebody is a slow death, it takes time. You know, it's not about this particular size, about that big. I got the sample one in the sacristy. I can show you guys next time, but it takes a lot of it to kill somebody. So, for Stephen, through his sufferings, that he's receiving his martyrdom, and as you can imagine, it takes time and also kind of bloody too. So he receiving his martyrdom, and yet he still forgive his persecutor. Stephen forgive his persecutor. He is the first martyr after Jesus. After the passion, the death and the passion of Jesus Christ himself, Stephen is the first martyrdom, received the first martyrdom. And he willing to die for it. Remember, this is big, this is significant. Remember, if we go back to the conversation from the gospel during the time of the passion of Jesus, when the religious leaders say that, look, if it's just a simple movement, it will die out eventually. Right? It didn't. It's getting bigger. And there is somebody who actually died for the faith to proclaim the gospel. That's as big. That's as big to the rest of the community to say that this is the way of martyrdom, the way to see it, the way to lead us to a holy life. At the same time, guess who in the place of the stoning of Stephen? Somebody famous. I heard Paul. Right? So here we get Stephen being stoned to death, literally. His garment is filled with blood. So after he died, guess what people do? Take Stephen's garment, soak in blood of his martyrdom, bring it to the feet of St. Paul. Bring to the feet of St. Paul. Isn't that interesting? Is that interesting that when we're beginning to think about the early church community, that how they're beginning to live out their faith from the preaching of the apostle that lent itself from Jesus himself and living in a community within the first years, and living it is one thing, preaching it another thing, but willing to die for it. By the example of St. Stephen, it's become a different movement now. The movement getting bigger now. It's not just a simple small group of people who get together to celebrate in house churches, who not just gather together a symbol of breaking of the bread anymore, but now willing to die for what they believe in. Die for what they believe in. And Stephen just so happened is the first one. All right, before I continue, do we have any further question? Yes. Jew or Jewish, they're about the same. Jews refer to the people, the Jews, king of the Jews. The Jewish is actually the Jew is also the term that refers to them as well, but now we also include the religion, because not all Jews are. We have to deal with Jewish diaspora as well. So what that means is that just because you are Jews, it doesn't mean that you carry the same belief. Yep. So for example, and another way we can look and say, in general, people also refer to them as the Israelite, which is we hear a lot from the Old Testament. But however, when we lend itself into the New Testament, we don't hear the Israelite anymore, but we hear the Jews. Because now it's a combination. Remember that I said earlier about you get these four big empire surrounding if you look at the map that I kind of give to you guys, so there are two maps. One of them is more like the local map of the region, and the other one is the map of the surrounding in the best as it can be, that we can imagine that, you know, the Jewish region, the Jerusalem, Judea, and all, it's quite small compared to the rest of them. But now you get these four big empires with all the merchants, soldiers, prisoners, crisscrossing, going through the region, have a big influence. So to narrow down to call the term of Israelite is quite a challenge now. So they call the Jews. So far, so good? All right. Why don't we take a little break and we come back in a couple minutes? We come back in a couple minutes so that any question or anything you bring it up, we can address them.
How long is a couple minutes?
Well, let's say 5-10 minutes will be enough for a restroom break. All right. How about let's gather back in 10 minutes?
10 minutes, okay.
So that gives you enough time for restroom break. All right, I think it's 10 minutes. I see him coming back. If Bobby coming back, I know it's 10 minutes. All right, I hope you guys able to get some time to go to the restroom, take a break, get some water and everything else. I hear a couple questions that is actually quite good. And one of the questions probably it's better for me just to give her the microphone so that she can just say the question instead of me repeating it.
Hey, you got in trouble now.
Well, no, I don't always, it doesn't always come out right what I'm trying to ask. But what I asked, Father, is not disputing that St. Stephen was the first martyr, but were there others that were being persecuted for their faith? And were the Romans, here I go, you should have helped me, Father. Were they still, the death penalty was that they were still crucifying the criminals? So I thought, well, St. Stephen is recognized as the first martyr, but I was kind of questioning, were there others that were persecuted before him?
I think that's a good question. Many of us, we don't realize in that. Was there other people being persecuted who died? And of course, yes, there are. There are people who've been persecuted, but your question, it is one question, but actually it's break into two different answers. First of all, when we look at the crucifixion here, it's a form of punishment by the Roman, and only deserved for those who are treason, who are rise up against the Roman. If we remember from our history, the famous treason was Sparta. Oh no, not Sparta. The slave who ride Sparta? Spartacus. God, why did I think Sparta? Must be the city up north. If we remember Spartacus, the revolt, the treason of that, it took total of 4 generals get together to defeat Spartacus and his army. And guess what happened to them? All of them who were being captured, they were all put on the cross along the road all the way back to Rome. It's reminding all the people that if you rise up against Rome, this is what happened to you. It's not a fast way to die. It's a very slow way to die. So that is the Rome way of killing people, punishing people. Stoning is more of the Jewish tradition. So what that means is that for Stephen, he wasn't being martyred by the Roman. It means that he been persecuted by the religious Jewish leader, who probably from the Jew school of the Pharisees and Sadducees. But I think we can say that he probably been persecuted by the school of the Pharisees, religious leader of the school of the Pharisees. How do we know that? If we will go back to the Acts of the Apostle, remember that Paul, who asked the Sadducee leadership, religious leader, give him the permission to persecute Christians. And Paul witnessed the martyrdom of Stephen. Even Paul, in his letter, he said that this is what I did. I was there to give a permission to stoning Stephen. I was the witness. And even more so, after they stoning Stephen, they bring that bloody cloak to the feet of Paul. So we have a good ideas who is behind the scene on this one. Yet, Bobby.
I was gonna ask, what do you think the charges were?
The charger for Stephen?
Yeah, the charge.
oh, the charges for Stephen is blasphemy. If you're blasphemy, that means that, remember that happened to Jesus a couple of times when he was in the temple, in the synagogue, and he preaching, and we say that you blasphemy against God, so they take him out to stone him. They work. I'll be right with you.
That wasn't Jesus in action. In reality, he was played by the Jews. They only used the Romans as a tool.
Now we get into politics. I think you have the answer already. He asking, is it Jesus being crucified by the Jews or the Roman? So we all think that is, when we talk about that, that's a whole different section when we need to break it down to how the politics taking place. But to give us a reference to what I said earlier in my presentation, I said that this a whole entire region here, right, is under Herod. But on top of that, there is somebody called governor controlling the region who have to report back to Rome. So now you get the two leaders in the region playing politics. And we all know what happened when politics taking place. People die. So there's a power struggle in the region. Who got a bigger army? The Roman. And of course, there are a couple of incidents in the time of Roman before Jesus. There was there are a couple of revolt, economic revolt and everything else taking place, but squashed by the Roman. It worked. Even more so later on, also give the name called the zealot. Zealot also means that a person who would carry a small knife with them, and guess what they do with it? If you guys remember watching Odd from HBO, they call Shank, the Roman soldier. So that's what the name coming out from.
Paul was persecuting Christians, and again, that question is, St. Stephen was the first martyr, and persecuting them wasn't killing the people.
Yes, he got the permission to yeah, he does. He got that permission.
But they still recognize St. Stephen.
He was the first one. He was the first one. Remember that Stephen was the first one. Remember that all this taking place, all the Jesus movement after the passion, the resurrection, and the Pentecost, and the martyrdom of Stephen, all this taking place within the first year, which is huge. For something to grow that big within the first year, that actually the school of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they have to concern about, that is huge. They're hoping that Jesus died, everything just gone. That's what they're hoping for. And even religious leaders among themselves, they will say that, look, if he died and if nothing here, then the thing will be gone. We don't have to worry about that. Oh boy, they were wrong. The whole thing gave even bigger. And now we actually have somebody who's willing to die for that. And that person is not even the Jews. That person is Greek, the Hellenistic. They're willing to do that. And now we look at the Hellenistic community, they have this faith, and they saw what happened to Paul. And guess what they do? They got up, they move. And when they move, guess what they take with them? They take along with them their faith. They take along with their religion, their practices, how they live out their faith at the community, and they begin to formulate all that. So after the Stephen martyrdom, people think and say, well, everything is in, but actually it's not. We can hear that from the story of Philip. Philip encountered the eunuch and able to preach. And that event, that incident was taking place after the martyrdom of Stephen. So we know that the Saint Stephen martyr did not end Jesus' movement, but actually make it even bigger. The Greek or the Gentiles. Remember I said earlier that we got this small region being influenced by so many different 4 major empires. And you get all different groups that move in and out the region. Some stay, some continue to move on. But you get this whole diverse culture taking place in this region. So because of that, everybody thinking that say, look, they stop them. It keeps spreading like wildfire. The Hellenistic group of people, they say, look, Stephen, who representing us, who died for us, who actually, his martyrdom, give faith to the group. So they take that and continue to live and continue to make it even bigger into a movement. And so now began with something small like this, getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So by the end of first year, you're like this. So to help us to visualize, the first year after Jesus, Passion and the Pentecost, the church is not a small number of couple followers anymore. It's now spread into a Gentile, into a Hellenistic group, into the Greek, into other group in the region. Good question. Do you have any more questions? God, you guys are a good student. Well, I will try my best. Do you have any other concern? So today's session that cover Saint Stephen. So we know that Saint Stephen is a small figure in the entire pictures of the first year of the movement. That going from A to B to C to D, but in order to get to, the way it was, we have to take into consideration of all these things have certain influence and impact in the early church community. And you can imagine that the 12 apostles, well 11, eventually 12, this is what they have to deal with. They were thinking they're only dealing with the Jewish Christian community. They were never expecting dealing with the Hellenistic now, the Gentiles. And what do we do with that? And even more so, now we begin to see the person of Paul come into the picture. I'm giving you a header for the next session. Paul and epistle. All right, final thought. Anybody have any question? Yes. Actually, the point is we had a good question here. Was that the theology taking place here is that they believe that Jesus would come in their own time. And actually, that's what they believe in. In the early church community, believe that, yes, Jesus will come back within their own time. And even we see that in Paul's writings, that he mentioned that Jesus will come back within their own time. We don't know that time. Eventually, they come to that realization that, no, we have to working from God's time, not their time. There are a couple of them there why they say the way it is, and we see that in particular writing. And this is more of a concrete cultural practice here that we can relate it to without going to the whole theological understanding, because in Jesus, of course, we look at from the gospel writing, we know that Jesus talking about, I will come back again, I will not leave you alone, and I say I will send the advocate when I was gone, and so on. I think this one come out from Matthew or Luke, forgot which one it is one. If we remember the scene in the tomb, that all the cloth is being folded, right? The understanding here is this. For a Jewish tradition, when they have a meal, they sit together, just like we would have a meal together or share a meal. They have their utensil, their cloth, and everything else. And they also have somebody who will serve them. Of course, at the time, we call slave. So when they serve them, one way to let the slave know, or the servant know, that you are returning back to your seat to continue dining, is folding your napkin, folding your cloth. So that when the servant, they come by, they don't see you, but they're recognizing that, oh, he will or she will come back. Because how you set it up and how you're folding it, they know that you will come back, so they will not clean your spot. However, if you are not folding it, you just crumble it up and throw it there, the servant walk by, they look at it and say, that person is not coming back. Therefore, they begin to clean up that spot. So the same understanding carry over into the tomb scene, that everything fall neatly. So the understanding is that Jesus will return. It's straight out from the tradition, the practice of the people. So that even if somebody who do not know Jesus and able to read and able to captivate by that scene, I think it's from Matthew, but I could be wrong on that one, because Matthew is connecting with more Jewish tradition here. So because of that, we can see that the understanding, if somebody who not familiar with the Jesus teaching, but able to just read that particular story, the first thing that person come to mind and say, it will come back. Resurrected, will come back. It's just like going away, we'll come back for that. All right, so I'm gonna give you a head up for, yes, Bobby.
One thing that may not have gotten mentioned, but Saint Stephen, that was in the Bible, that's Acts 7.
Let me see, I think I included in here somewhere. Yes, Acts 6-7. All right, so next session will be on the topic of St. Paul and, the epistle. So, that's going to be a big topic, but we'll do my best to cover the noticeable one, but also the chance for us to know who is actually St. Paul is. Grand night, when will be the next session? A week from tonight. There you go. So the 29th? All right. We'll be here, the same place, the church? All right. He making me work. Thank you. Yes, we have a flyer in the back of the church. Feel free to take along with you so that you actually know that the next session will be on the epistle. But we cannot understand the epistle unless we get to know who is this person of Paul. Who this crazy maniac? He's a St. Paul guy. Sorry, St. Paul, but probably be me, because Father Tom, he coming back. So hopefully I can talk something good about St. Paul here. Well, thank you. Let me know if, like I said, during our conversation, if anything come up, you say, I'm confused. Raise your hand, let me know. If you're confused, the rest of us confused as well. If I have the answer, I will address it. If I don't, I say, oh, let me look it up on Google or something. But if you're asking for the resources I'm using from the early church, or they call it early church movement, by my two professors, Father Bevan and Schroeder. And they both of them are alive and still teaching in Chicago. So, the early church movement, or another one they call Constant and Context of the early church movement by Bevan and Schroeder. Both of them are missionary. Both of them are my professor at CTU. So I hope they don't watch me. They say you failed class again, Chung. All right. Other than that, let us do a closing prayer by pray our Father together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. May the Almighty God bless all of you who are gathered here, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace. It's actually kind of like neat because I get to learn all this again.